Hi everybody, I'm posting a quick video here as promised. I've made my way through most of your maps and for the most part they were really well done. You guys nailed it. Even if you used a combination of like mapping out your terms and then a bit of an explanation on a second page. Some people drew pictures, some people like used collage stuff with words and pictures. Really good. If you don't have something posted, it's because I had trouble opening it, and so you will receive an email from me telling you if I was unsuccessful altogether. I made an attempt on my iPad. I've been marking in a couple of different locations, and so those last couple that I had trouble getting into to begin with, I'm going to try from my desktop today and see if they work. Otherwise, I'll send you an email and ask you to upload it in a different format. So, for the most part, well done. If you received an email from me suggesting that you need to do a little work, then, because it's clear that you misunderstood or whatever the case might be, then go ahead and get it fixed up and send it back to me. Regarding the news blog, some of you are emailing saying that you can't post, and that's because the due date was October 3rd. In your UR courses, with each date, it says news post due, first paper due, or personal map due, or the due dates are very clearly marked. They're also in the syllabus. And so some people weren't able to post, and the reason for that is because it closes. The assignments close once the due date passes. So you can see some people doing some work on the roof outside of my window. If you were unable to post, that's why. So I don't know. I guess you're going to have to contact me if you were unable to post and explain how come you didn't get things done by the due date. Because even though I'm flexible, you can't just not do your work and then, however long later be like, I couldn't post or I couldn't do this, how come? So please get in touch with me and we'll see if we can work something out. That's that covered. Please be mindful going forward. It's your responsibility to know when things are due. And I said at the beginning of the semester, if you couldn't get something done, you need to contact me. And I am quite flexible, but I don't appreciate being taken advantage of, or just like you just didn't do it, right? I mean, I can't just like not do my work, right? It's one of those things. So you need to get a hold of me and we'll see what we can sort out. Just to quickly follow up on a couple of questions about the midterm. So if you are a student that has any kind of accommodations that require like extra time or whatever the case might be, that should all be set internally because you're completing the exam online. Now, that said, the exam is open for I think 6 or 7 hours. So you should be able to, I think it opens at 4, maybe on the day of, which is we have class at that time for an hour and a half. And then you have the remaining 5.5 hours or whatever it might be to complete the exam. So we're going to do a review next week. Some people are asking, what about, do I have to study out of the textbook, out of this, out of that? Here's my format is typically multiple choice. So there will be a section of multiple choice, and that might have like a couple of fill in the blanks or like a true false or whatever. And then there'll be a number of longer answer questions. Now, they're not 5-page answers typed out. What we're looking for is a few paragraphs for you to fully explain what you're talking about. I'm never going to ask you specifically in chapter such and such of the textbook. It's a huge book. This class is designed, when I teach it, so that we use film, reading, and lecture, and that is so that you get a combination of delivery methods. You have access to this knowledge from a variety of forms, and I'm hoping that means you'll get a really well-rounded delivery. You'll be able to take the information in from these various sources, and it'll really sink in. I'm not going to ask you about a specific chapter. What it will tell you is that for the longer answer questions, the more that you are able to refer to something from the textbook or use examples of the films to support how you're answering that question, the better mark you're going to get. You will be penalized if you don't use at least one example in each of those answers. So you've got lots of films to draw on and lots of reading. Now, I'm not looking for you to say chapter 58 entitled blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's an exam. But if you can say in that chapter where, the focus was, that the fabulous child X who was raised without a gender, or, there should be some examples that stick out to you. And typically how the class works is that there's a long answer question for each section that we've taken. So one on kind of the introduction, one on gender, so femininity and masculinity, one on mothering, one on women's health. This is how the class is typically organized. where the exam is concerned, so that you know there's a section and you'll have a question on each section. So that's how I encourage you to study, right? You need to look at the notes. We've talked about that stuff in class. There's lots of I'm not going to ask you ever about a particular statistic. For the most part, I'm not going to ask you to say this many percentage of women in sub-Saharan Africa do such and such. You might need to know what the percentages of the world's poor who are women, or what the percentages of women who produce what percentage of the world's food, or something like that, right? Because both of those are easy statistics. I don't ask a lot of dates, but there are a few that are significant. When women got the vote is really significant. When abortion was, it being illegal was overturned, it became decriminalized in 1988. It's a really important date. The École Polytechnique, December 6th, Montreal Massacre. Also, like a really significant event in Canadian history. So there are a few things, but for the most part, I'm not looking for a bunch of dates. I want to know that you understand the material. I want to know that you've got a grasp of how complex this stuff is. And that is what I'm looking for you to show me. We're going to talk about it again on Monday, but and there have been a few questions, so just so that you have a bit of an idea while you're studying. I just quickly want to follow up with a few thoughts on motherhood. The notes are posted. But we didn't really have a chance to have a super good conversation, so I really want to highlight that motherhood is when I'm referring to motherhood, I'm talking about the institution, right? How it's sort of like the big ideal, how it's designed under patriarchy, and how the ideals and expectations associated with that are not necessarily reflective of how women experience their role as a mother. Mothering for me is a verb. It's an action, it's behaviors. When I'm teaching it, when I talk about it, that's what I'm referring to. It's caretaking work. It's a particular kind of role that is taken on. And because it's a verb, because it's an action word, and because it's about behaviors and characteristics, these are things that we find everywhere in all kinds of people. They're not specific to women who are mothers. Lots of women do mothering work. Lots of men do mothering work. And they may not have biological children of their own or even adopted children of their own. Perhaps they're members of their families. Perhaps they work in daycares and elementary schools and take care of little people that, are there while their parents are at work. So I consider that my son goes to a place where he is mothered very well by all of the people who look after him at his daycare. So for me, it's about an action, right? It's a particular kind of work that is done in the world, and it's not always reflective of a role as an actual parent. I think, we have some really oppressive ideas where mothering is concerned, where motherhood is concerned. So intensive mothering, this is in your notes about this, measures who's a good mother or not, and it tends to be really over the top, and it tends to be focused on mothering as the sort of primary role that a person might play, and ignores the fact that lots of mothers, in this case I'm going to talk about women, that are also juggling care of a home and a full-time job outside of the home and this sort of thing. And so, all of your energy, all of your time, all of your money is supposed to go toward your children. They're supposed to be involved in a million activities. You are always seeking out the experts. You come last. Your entire life centers around being a mother. And for the women that that's true for, that's totally fine. It's just that not all women experience being a parent in that way. For some, they also need their job to feel like they're a complete person, or they require their outside relationships and other their friendships, and to feel like a complete person. And so I want us to be really mindful of the fact that this is the kind of expectation that can be very damaging to people who take on this role, because if you don't meet those things, then sometimes you feel like you're failing, and that is not the case. Parenting is complex and it's complicated, and these ideals are often really oppressive and can infringe on the joy of being a parent, because if you always feel like you're failing, it's hard to find the joy, right? Empowered mothering would be sort of the opposite, I suppose, if you will. It's about recognizing that women also have needs, and that children benefit when the mother is well taken care of and when her needs are also met. And it's all about empowering women who are in this role and allowing them the agency and authority to make their own decisions and decide what works for the best for their family, for them and their children. This is sort of more conducive to happy families and to mothers who are feeling good about being mothers and how they're doing it. And that in turn really does benefit the children. want to just highlight a couple more things. The notes are there, so I'm not going to totally go through them, but just pay attention. How do we learn to mother? Where do we learn those behaviors from it? And how does it happen? Is it an instinct, or is it about culture, or our families of origin, or the people in our lives? I also want us to think critically about what happens when we don't have good role models, when we don't have a way to model, a way to reflect and base our own parenting practices, on those who came before us or those who surrounded us, because maybe those models were not healthy. And what that says about, certain communities. We have entire generations in our Indigenous communities who were taken from their parents, put in residential schools, treated terribly, abused horribly, and whose only model was really, really harmful. The people that did the caretaking in those institutions were often violent and very oppressive and extraordinarily abusive. And so we see, when we're looking at the racism in this province, it's a perfect example of assuming that people just know how to take care of families, that people know how to parent, that they know what to do. And in fact, experience plays a huge role. That's not to say that everybody who had that experience is going to grow up and do the same thing. What I am saying is that when we have entire generations of people whose idea of family has been seriously fractured by the experiences they bore because they were removed from their families, it's absolutely unrealistic to have the expectation that they will somehow replace what their own experience was with something else without there being any residual damage. And so I think it's very important for us to think about it. We look at parents, I think, in lots of different social circumstances, some of which I mentioned in the previous class, but how we judge people when we see them out and about in public, about how they behave, how they present themselves. That's also true of parenting. And so when we're making those judgments, I suppose, I think, racism is one of the things that often plays a really big role in the kinds of judgments that we make, but so too do we fail to acknowledge that, the experience that some of us might have, which is of perhaps a relatively healthy family of origin, not everyone has. Not everyone has healthy role models, and that can be a real struggle, not to model and sort of recreate what you already know. It's not impossible. That's not what I'm saying either. People do it every day, but it is a difficult task, and it can only benefit us as a society moving forward if we can acknowledge those things and look to make sure that we are creating good and healthy role models for everyone and supports to allow people to parent in a positive way, and acknowledge that parents also, don't stop being people, that they still have needs that if met, allow them to be their best version of themselves as a parent. We all have needs for social interaction. Adults have a need for grown-up interaction, grown-up conversation. People have a need to take care of themselves. People have a need to sleep well or to eat well. And sometimes in parenting, this stuff falls to the bottom of the list. And so there's a number of things I think that it's important to be really mindful of when we think about parenting, and just to acknowledge that it's a lot more complex and complicated sometimes than we often, really not acknowledge, but we're often willing to tell the truth about. So that when we are out and about or see certain things, it's very easy to cast, a really ugly blanket of judgment on somebody else without knowing what those circumstances are. Mothering also often has a negative impact on women's ability to participate in the labor force and to participate equally in the world. And parenting should never be that kind of burden. It shouldn't be a source of oppression. For lots of people it is. And so again, when we look at our social bodies and how they're organized and the problems that we have and how we might fix them, this is something that we need to be, considering and really, really mindful of, because it plays a huge role in where our resources go, and also just how our bodies are structured, how our social bodies operate. Okay, so that's it. That's my quick video. Please, be mindful of your due dates. I will see you next week to talk about the midterm. I hope you have a good weekend. Take care.